I love Stephen King, and I understand his problems with The Shining, but it doesn't mean that The Shining is not the greatest horror film ever made,
Well, let's
because it
say,
is.
can you really wake up Stephen King in the 70s or the 80s? Is there really a
I
chance of
know.
that
He
happening?
was on cocaine.
Yeah, like
Right.
like when was he sleeping? You had to really
That's
look
a
at
great point, Justin.
Yeah. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is episode 6 of the Storyteller series. I am so honored and glad to be back with my pal W. Axel Foley from the Daily DVR podcast, where they literally pod about everything, and it's great in every way. Axel, tell everybody where they can find you, give a little bit of a backstory for you, set it up, give some exposition.
All right. Well, thank you, Justin, for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's been a while since I've been on camera. But yeah, you can check us out at dvrpodcast.com. We've covered Watchmen, Leftovers, Lost, Game of Thrones, Westworld, so many different shows, Mindhunter. We trying to do about a show a week during this coronavirus, but I am super excited to be here talking about the greatest film director that was or ever will be, Mr. Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the links will be below. And Kubrick is really the genesis of filmmaking for many of the creators in which we see now, the modern age auteurs. And I want to talk a little bit briefly. We're going to keep this to about an hour. And I know it's hard to condense Kubrick into an hour since we tried the whole filmography with Nolan. And I think it's about the same. I think there's 13 features from Kubrick. But nonetheless, we're going to just try to focus on his methodology and his technical prowess and what makes him so special, because you hear Kubrick just being kind of spewed like a vomitorium. It's just like, oh, Kubrick. This is the man behind everything. And he really is a huge influence behind appropriately casted and sequenced by me, Spielberg with Jason Schenkel, who will be on next week to cover. But he is really the origin for so many people and inspiration for so many directors. But the history of film kind of goes a little like, at first it's the fascination with the medium itself. If you ever watch any old trailers, it's like the old time Hollywood. Well, they don't say old time Hollywood, but they say Hollywood, and they talk about like some monuments and blah blah blah. And then it's a little bit of the actors, but then when you hit the 60s and the 70s especially, you get the auteurs, which is just author in French, so it's fancy. But you get your Kubricks, you get your Hitchcocks, and Wells is pretty much the origins of them. But Kubrick is really the one that sticks out, and I think we're hitting an auteur age again with the Nolans of the worlds, and Spielberg and so forth. And we're focusing more so not on the leading man or lady, but on the filmmaker, and it is really fascinating. What is your experience with Kubrick? I picked you for a reason for this. You are from New Jersey originally. You're a West Coast fella now, but you definitely identify with him, and you definitely have a passion for his work, right?
Yeah, man. I mean, Stanley Kubrick is my favorite director. He was an inspiration to me to become a filmmaker, to get into filmmaking. So I started making movies went a little bit after I saw 2001. I mean, his work is really important to me because as I was growing up, his films kind of were taught me the difference between perhaps a film and a movie. You
Mhm.
know, as you say, today we may be entering, and as I mean, since the inception of the kind of auteur theory, they've always existed. And you look at certain times in cinema, specifically the 70s, when you had all these great directors that we look at now, Kubrick being one of them, though he started making films in the 50s. And we kind of see them as the vanguard. And we today, you know, it's a little bit different. It's a lot cheaper to make things, and people have the opportunity to be an auteur. And I think maybe we see that more in television than we do in big films. I mean, our theaters are a business, and they're stuffed with stupid Marvel. I mean, I shouldn't say stupid because I love them, but I'm in my Kubrick mode, so I have to make fun of them. But I mean, come on. You have grown adults who think whose favorite movie is an Avengers movie, and that's cool. But if they also then think that that was the best movie that came out the year before, that's where you have a problem, where there's really no difference between low and high art. And for me growing up, Kubrick was the standard bearer for the high art, for what a film should be, a complete dedication to the craft. To me, that is why he is so popular and why he separates himself from so many other directors of his time. I think when you get down to it, the classic battle is Kubrick versus Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And I think that's mainly because the both of them were so dedicated to their craft. And I think for me, that's what kind of made Kubrick films so important to me, is because he was there to make a film. It's not, there's never a scene in a movie in which he was concerned about fitting the CGI in
Yes.
or anything other than telling this story that relates to the film. And he was always conscious that a film is a film, it's not a play. He was always concentrating on the holistic nature of all the elements that make it so. So
Yeah.
that's kind of why he's important to me. I could go into kind of my background of like how I got introduced to him, but I think you wanted to say something.
No, no, no. I absolutely appreciate you, and we will do the W. Axel Foley, how he tells stories.
I'll just keep on rambling.
No, 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 no. But it's important because I come from a slightly different generation, right? In which I hear a lot of my filmmakers, meaning like people more from my generation, speak about Kubrick in this way that he is immortal. And after
Yeah, yeah.
researching him, a lot of what you speak seems true, because he is the person that has taken this visual medium, and I spew it. I don't care, because I will keep spewing it about appreciating mediums on this channel, about what a medium is and how important and how it is so vastly different to have a novel versus a film, or a film versus a stage play, and people don't appreciate that. And I think Kubrick really stands out in a lot of senses, but one of those is the way, because he started off as a photographer. He had a traditional upbringing in New York, but he was raised as he is Jewish, but he was not raised religiously.
No,
This does play
he
into
was
what
an
we're gonna.
atheist.
Yes, but he had an atheistic perspective. We'll get into it, not deeply, but just to give a little background. But his father was a doctor that had a passion for photography. My father is a photographer, a professional photographer, and he
Very
ended up.
good too.
Yeah, he is very good. Yeah, Pops is
That's
good,
awesome.
but it is important to note that he never really excelled in school in the sense of going to school, but he excelled in intelligence. He has like an IQ around 200 supposedly, and he started taking photos, and he found a love for photography in meaning aspect ratios, meaning perspective. And he was picked up by Look magazine. One of his famous first photos, which I'll show on screen, is after FDR dies, Roosevelt, in this vendor on the New York streets, just sad, and this capturing a story in a photo. And this is when we talked about Denis Villeneuve last week, and I had John from Cortex Videos on, who just graduated from film school, and I really wanted to break into this type of discussion about talking about how directors versus screen. Now, Kubrick, just to lay out all the cards, he actually does, he's credited, at least, as a screenwriter for almost all of his films. But he does a lot of adaptations, and there's no shame on that whatsoever. So let's not disregard that he has writing skills as well. But I think a photographer is a perfect, prerequisite for the director position, because there's that old adage of a director tells them where to put the camera and the actors what to say. Now, that is a minimalist approach, and they do much more than that, as we will get into. Sometimes maybe too much, maybe not enough. But he definitely understands, and he understood the power of perspective and the power of how to showcase this visual story through this visual medium in a way that evokes emotion, in which I deal with every day with people telling me the books are better and they're more descriptive and they tell me more about this character. I'm like, okay, that's a book. They get to give you an internal monologue. But Kubrick was one of the pioneers of directors, the auteurs, that were able to really utilize what a camera can do with a steady cam, as well as his zooming in on actual characters, emotions, the way in which they emote, and using that visual medium into the max. And I think that's really what stepped it up to the next level. And it's very interesting because he has this ragtag story about this guy that was his photographer. Now, he's a doctor's son, so he doesn't come from nothing. But he also wins chess matches, right? He competes, like he plays chess like a hustler for money in Manhattan or something.
That's how he funded his first three of them documentaries: Flying Padre, Day of the Flight, and the Seafarers. Day of the Fight, I should say, and the Seafarers, as well as Fear and Desire in 1953, were funded by him going to parks in New York, Tompkins Square Park, and basically hustling chess money for people, which is a great story. And it's very,
standing alone, that could be a film itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, everything about the dude is very nerdy. It's very New York. He is sardonic. It's a great story, and I think that it says a lot about him as a person, which is that most people, I think, like myself, who are big fans of Stanley Kubrick, almost like, I've never really delved. I don't try to find out about his personal life, or I know a little bit about his own beliefs as they reflect upon his films.
Yeah.
But it's almost because the man was his films. That was his utter dedication. And he lived a private life and wanted it to be that way. And I kind of respect that. It's a no nonsense approach. And that this is one of the things that attracted me to him. There's a lot of talk when you talk about Kubrick about, like you said, his technical prowess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not only did he invent ways of telling a story, he helped invent and push forth the equipment that made it possible, whether it was lenses, steady cams. Like he didn't invent the steady cam.
No,
but
he normalized
he was a big
it.
proponent of it. Yeah, he really invested in it. It was a guy named Garrett something. I can never remember his name, or Gareth. And same things with the lenses that he worked
with NASA, and then he used it to film by candlelight. Like he gets a lens from NASA, and then does, it's insane.
But that comes out of function, right? Like that's what I'm saying is there is this kind of mystical filmmaker. Ooh, Kubrick! Oh my God! And like you're saying, where there's documentaries made about the conspiracy theories behind what he was, and he shot the fake moon landing and all this kind of stuff. But that has always been so hilarious to me, because I think that when you really become an appreciator of Kubrick, what you're really an appreciator of is that he was just no bullshit, no nonsense, none of that stuff was actually a part of the man himself or the films, it's almost as if the absence of something
Yes.
created this void, and you have fandom rushing in to fill it with these crazy stories, like we were talking about before we started about, oh, he's a madman who did 150 takes of Tom Cruise
We
walking
will,
through a
we
door.
will, yes,
You
we
know?
will get to that. The methodology of him.
But I just, yeah, we don't have to get in. But I mean, I just think that all of these things, to me, these legends, right,
Mhm.
illustrate to me actually an incredibly boring fucking like black and white Jew from the Bronx who was
Yeah.
like, this is the way I want it, do it. And I think that I understand that. And I love that's what it had always attracted me to him. When I was, the way I got into Kubrick is when I was about 9 or 10 years old. Actually, it was when I was 10. I began reading Arthur C. Clarke. I was a huge fan. I think I picked up Dolphin Island was the first book I read. Then I eventually made my way, which is more of a almost a children's book. Then I made my way, of course, to the classic 2001.
Mhm.
And I still have the copy from when I was a kid with the receipt of when I bought it, because oftentimes I'm like, why did I read this when I was 10 years old? But I did, and
Why
I
did you
fell
keep
in
the
love with it.
receipt when you were 10 years old? Is a
I
beautiful.
use it as a bookmark.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
I use all my receipts as bookmarks. So I always know when I bought the book. So when I go back to my book collection, which doesn't exist as much as it did, I had to give so many books away moving across the country. But I love this book, and I gave it to my friend Brian Sedlak, who was my best bud, and we found out there's a movie for this. And how did we find out? Because we had to go to like the video store or whatever that existed in 1984 and go find it, or it was playing on HBO. I can't even remember. There was no internet then. And we sat down, and I remember it exactly. It was an afternoon after school, and we sat down in his living room. We got popcorn and everything. We told his mom we're watching this movie 2001, and she kind of looked at us like, okay, all right. But she knew we were like into science fiction. And in the middle of broad daylight, we sat down for whatever 2 hours and 40 minutes and watched 2001. And it was a defining moment of my artistic life. I was absolutely blown away. And one of the things I was blown away by was how Kubrick had managed to take a book which is kind of straightforward, though it
Mhm.
has its crazy moments. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke is a very dry writer, and inject so much into this story. And really, for me, is he connected with the humanity,
Yeah.
and there was so much empathy and love that I saw in 2001. A lot of people think it's boring and dry and
And
heartless and
cold.
soulless
He is
and
accused.
cold.
He is accused of many of the things that Nolan is now accused of. I don't.
Which
When
I don't, I've never understood my entire life. Like, to me, Stanley Kubrick is one of the most empathetic, loving, humanistic directors that has ever worked. And I think
yeah.
that's a lot of what people find in it is, again, it's that absence of something which he allows you to fill.
Yeah, and there's power in that ambiguity. And what I just want to cut
Yeah.
in because I don't want to jump too ahead is the one thing
No.
that I noticed through my research of him is the issues with these conspiracy theories, as fun as they may be, and we'll get into staging and blocking and kind of where a lot of this drives from things in the background and stuff like that. But authenticity is something that is synonymous with Kubrick for me. Authenticity,
Yeah.
meaning I believe he would have blown his brains out if he would have been a part of Apollo 11. I just, he is all about Spartacus broke him. Spartacus was the film in which he had to take over. He did not get along with the cinematographer. He did not have creative control, and everybody likes to credit Wells, and rightfully so, for Citizen Kane and kind of that, spat, for lack of a better word there, but or outlash at the industry and being independent. But Kubrick actually did live in work a very non big studio controlled, he lived this life and he worked this career which was
Yeah.
artistically his own, and he really owned it, which is interesting that Spielberg, we'll talk about Spielberg next week, but Spielberg is very unique and very authentic, and he's managed to work within the system more, but Kubrick definitely worked outside of it. Spartacus is what broke him. So what Axel's talking about there, and talking about how he is known as this cold, I just recently listened to a lecture from a gentleman that I'm blanking on, I'll put up on the screen, wrote a book about Kubrick's style, this Kubrickian, as they like to phrase it, and it reminds me, and it seems so similar to what people say about Nolan now. And I think it comes down to that ambiguity in which he injects into his films, because it's like there's such power in it, and he investigates it, and he gives you this emotional spine that is primal. It's emotions we all get. Like you said, 2001 Space Odyssey is the human condition, because why wouldn't it be? Because it's about humans going into space. Doesn't need to be,
and to make the robot the most human character.
Makes you think.
With even the voice, even if you notice how the actors were actually instructed, I mean, the actors, really, it's Dave, a little bit of Frank, but are very monotone, whereas Hal is like, hello, Dave. He has, even though it's robotic, there's a lilt that he was looking for, which gave you a sense of unease. It was trying to achieve the uncanny valley with a voice.
Yes.
Which I think was achieved. And that, like you're saying, this ambiguity, this unknown, I think makes you decide for yourself. So it is a mirror that is being held up to you. So I think that when a person says to me, I find Kubrick to be very cold or thin, I normally think to myself, this is a person who is not very in touch with their own emotions.
Yeah.
I think this is a person who is afraid of who they are, because when a mirror is held up, what they see reflected is they can't handle it, so they go cold. In all of his films, you see it, dude. Dr. Strangelove.
Yes,
Barry Lyndon and Eyes Wide Shut, maybe the greatest example.
I think that what Kubrick does is something that was a little bit ahead of its time, and also we do see a little bit of the art being I don't want to say, because it always deserved its praise, but once the artist dies, worth more. Give me a penny for my thoughts. Wait till I die. Give me $1. It's worth more, type deal. But it is true, he was not appreciated in his time. A lot of his awards were for cinematography, which rightfully so, and stuff like that. I think it had to do a little bit. But I
think what you're talking about there, though, with the awards, is a result of what you spoke of earlier. Which is a New York filmmaker who saw himself more along the lines of a photographer, a painter, a musician, than he did want to play into the idea. Because look, when you're looking at these films, okay, A Clockwork Orange came out in 1971. Barry Lyndon is 1974. Star Wars is 1977.
Yeah, he's way ahead of his time.
Shining is 1980. So when you're thinking about those guys, whether it's Spielberg, Coppola, all the guys, Scorsese, that they hung with, they were younger than Kubrick. They're about 25 years younger than him, 20 years younger than him. And he had started working earlier. Maybe not. I think Coppola is a little bit older, but he didn't really want to take part.
So what we've got going on is Fear and Desire, Killer's Kiss, which is a second film, which is I've recently gotten into a lot of Hemingway in a realistic, and I was a boxer myself, depiction of a boxer. And then you have The Killing, then you have Paths to Glory, which is his first relationship with Michael Douglas, who he takes over the Spartacus film, which Michael Douglas's production company is at this point running. And this is, if you've ever seen Trumbo, Dalton Trumbo, he's part of the Hollywood 10. He was one of those writers that was writing under pen names in order to get work and won multiple Academy Awards. Spartacus is a great story. I Am Spartacus derives from I Am Trumbo, essentially. Of everybody being one person, everybody standing united together as an outcast. He very much so, though, is not a Spartacus story for Kubrick. He definitely has a change in style from that, and I don't think of any other film that could go more against the grain than Lolita, which is a adaptation from a novel, and which is a trend within Kubrick's career, which deals with some pretty, I would say, taboo, to say the least, subject matter. That is pedophilia and so forth, but it is something that I believe that continues on, and we'll cap it off with Eyes Wide Shut, which I think does touch on this as well, in a genuine concern. The consensus on this is amongst the conspiracy theorists, which I will say there is a little bit of legitimacy, at least in my opinion, on he was definitely disenfranchised with Hollywood when you got to the post Spartacus era with him. You definitely see him rebel.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say. I don't know the guy. How could I? And I'm just saying,
but I
from
think
his
it's
work, fair to say.
It's the times too. I mean, you have Hollywood moving out of this kind of studio system, and by studio system, we're talking not only the types of films that were made, right?
Yeah.
But the methodology in which they were made, with hiring a stable of actors and all, and you had more independent production companies coming up, which had always existed, but were now becoming more prominent. And yes, Spartacus is one where, look, you're talking about a guy who would routinely have on a set, if possible, the bare minimum number of people. I mean, there are scenes, and I've read, and you have varying takes because it becomes legendary, that most of Eyes Wide Shut was shot with less than 5 crew members on the stage at one time. Less than 5. Now, if you went into a Marvel movie, you
don't have less than 5 directors. Yeah,
there's 5 people.
You got the Russo brothers. You got
it's not possible.
You got at least 5 directors.
It's become like a business, and that's what's so wonderful about Kubrick's films. If you wonder about how a person could have such control, it's because he kept it small. And with Spartacus, that wasn't possible. It was this huge production that, you're right, he kind of took for money, and he later said it was a bad choice. And it didn't work out. And, he tended to be sometimes a straightforward guy. So it sounds like he might at some points was bitter or whatnot. But actually, it just taught him, I think, as most people do in their life when they're working a job, what type of conditions are conducive to them being successful.
Well,
and when we see it followed up by Lolita, you're right. Like, that's quite, you go from like,
it's like a knee-jerk
Spartacus to like Lolita.
Yeah, that's a knee-jerk reaction. And as the master of chess in which he was, he sees Spartacus, in my opinion, as a good move fiscally to set himself up. And now, let's remind you, he came in, this wasn't his film, and there's reasons that this is such a story of freedom and embracing, ideals that are outside of the box. I mean, Trumbo's a decent story. It's a good story. Tail Gunner Joe is not a good story of the Red Scare and all that. And he actually has connections to this like ideology, as we'll see with Dr. Strangelove, and there is connections there. But he didn't like the restraints. He didn't like being a dog on the leash. He didn't like that. He didn't like that because was not the way in which he wanted it filmed, and he came into somebody else's piece. So
it's a different kind of movie.
It is.
Right?
It's just a different type of movie. Maybe if he would have had creative control from the beginning, but he said never again. And the knee-jerk reaction is Lolita, because trust me, that's a knee-jerk reaction. There's nothing wrong with the movie. It is what it is. If you go back in history, you will find more of these types of stories. And I don't necessarily think they're bad or good. It just is what it is. I'm just saying you couldn't get any different. We move on to his Doctor Strangelove. Now, this is where you start to get more of the technological prowess of Stanley Kubrick, of Stephen Kubrick. of his brother, his estranged brother from a different mother. You didn't know about that one.
His evil twin.
His evil twin, as you did not know, his insidious actions led to much detriment. But no, so Dr. Strangelove.
Kubrick, who directed Fast and Furious 20 through 24.
Tokyo Drift, the most mortal of mortal sins. Dr. Strangelove, which, is a film that embraces something that I like. Now, I did not tag this. I did not name this. It's called Black Comedy. But I find it to be very effective. You see this in Death of Stalin. You see this in Jojo Rabbit. You see this parody that leads to truth. In Dr. Strangelove, How I Learned to Stop Worrying in Love. A very elongated, I don't even think that's exactly it. How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Yeah, is the actual title of this. So this is this whole parody in which he starts to show a little bit of his creativity and his craftiness with his directing. He starts to tell actors that this is just a silly take, and he starts to have them do it. And he uses this in the film, but also this is where his connection starts to come with the government, because he needs to have this B-52 in air, and he needs to see the inside of it, meaning the instruments. Now, at this time, Stanley Kubrick is a licensed pilot. He is this Jewish-born Bronx native boy that has become a chess master to a photographer to now I am Spartacus to Lolita. Little sidestep. And then it starts Dr. Strangelove, and he has a situation in which he requests a few specs for the B-52 airplane. He does not receive them because they review the script at the Pentagon and they say, we think you might be poking some fun at us, so no thank you. He takes some photos from Life magazine, as the tale goes, with his DP, his director of photography, and he recreates what he thinks would be the inside of a B-52. Then, at the end of the filming, he lets them see the dailies. Not Tom Cruise, we'll get to that. But he lets them see a little bit of the film, and they see it, and they find it to be very, very accurate, and they find it to be astounding. And actually, Dr. Strangelove is one of those few films, as I talked about. I really like Jojo Rabbit. I really like Death of Stalin. I like Black Comedy. I think that the best way to send a message is to get people to open their eyes to things, eyes wide shut, things that they're not willing to open their eyes to, and parody and satire is usually the best way to go about that. This is a commentary about how easily these rogue pilots could go on and bomb and start a nuclear war. And about 6 years later, we do have cultural change. And I think this is where Kubrick really becomes immortal, because we have a situation in which, people always said he predicted the iPad. It's like, no. The iPad was created because Kubrick showed it in a film 30 years before, 40 years before. You know what I mean? Like, art imitates life, life imitates art. And this is a situation in which that's where the Minutemen come into play. That's where you have the codes that need to be put in for nuclear warfare. They actually take precautions that pertain to the issues in which he shows in this film. And this is his first connection with the government. And then we go into 2001 Space Odyssey, in which he works with NASA and all of these things, that this guy is such a big deal. And he is at this technical status that he is able to work with NASA on lenses to shoot a scene in candlelight and make it look regular, because he doesn't want perfection, because life isn't perfection. Kubrick wants reality, which, as we all know, is not all that beautiful, and he really learns to capture it. We have to remember that at this point of film, it was like just about 20 years into, they didn't think stories could be told through film. They literally didn't. I know that's hard to believe now. They did not think that novels would ever be surpassed by this medium. And you can argue, of course, we all still love books and all that, but they literally didn't think films could ever be a efficient storytelling medium, and they did. And then he takes it, and he came to this and said, it's not only capable, but it's not hard to do, and let me inject a few other practices that are going to really just change the world. And we see this with the government. I mean, no filmmakers are, in bed with NASA or the Pentagon at this time, regardless of Dr. Strangelove not being cooperated with. He still managed to do it. And he managed, and that's where all these theories about the moon landing come from. But he also leaves this emotion that Axel was so brilliantly bringing up earlier about this human connection. What I always speak about, primal emotions, this human aspect of the story. No matter how detached it gets, no matter how much satire is there, it still hits you. and it hits you in a way that you can relate to years later. It becomes immortal. You become something that is omniscient, something that is otherworldly. And I think that it's something that Kubrick captured that is just very, very special. And you see it because some of the best filmmakers to today will always cite him. They always cite Kubrick. And we're about to get into his practices and some of the questionable practices. And he really strived for authenticity. He really strived for depicting true events. And when you do a movie like The Shining, true events are a little bit hard to depict if you want to have authenticity injected into them. But, you know, as far as art imitating life and life imitating art, is there anything you want to say on that, Axel? I mean, like, you know, he predicted the iPad. It's like, no, the iPad was created because somebody thought of it because they saw that movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of the history of Apple, which they stole the name from the Beatles. So that's, you know, Steve Jobs was a marketing genius. He didn't even know how to program his own phone. But Wozniak, baby.
Well,
yeah,
have Wozniak sell it. All right, and we'll see how good it does.
Well, yeah.
You need both. Yeah, you need both.
I'm just playing around. I think that what you're saying is true. I think that in many ways he was able to have the freedom to try to create. And because of the experience, as you had laid out in Spartacus, and the decision to basically see what the studio system was, and instead of continuing to take jobs and complain about them, which a lot of people like to do in life, he said, fuck it, I'm going my own way. I'm going to try to get my own films produced. But he still had to work with distribution, and it was through Lolita, then Doctor Strangelove 2001, he was able to make an agreement with Warner Brothers and have a contract for, what was it, 40 years, 35 years, in which he was able to have free reign over his films.
Yeah.
The main reason, though, is because of his dislike of excess. Mm-hmm. And the overspending that would go on films. And anyone who's been on a film or television set will tell you it's true. I mean, the reason why these things cost so much money is because you're basically taking care of and housing human beings. You're creating like a village for the length of the production. And Kubrick had methods of paring that back, whether it was the number of hours that people worked, whether it was the amount of crew, or taking time before in pre-production. That was one of the things that he did, is the actual blocking and shooting of the film. Those ideas were allowed to be fluid and to take place on the set. The stringent thing that was put in earlier was the actual set that they got to. So the lengths that he would go to control things were to be able to create an environment in which improvisation and creativity could reign.
Yeah.
And I've always believed that. That the best way to create an environment for creativity and inspiration is to actually limit yourself and have very tight controls over that. You know, it's the old make a movie in a room.
Yeah, like kind of right puzzle. Here, what we have is an example of staging. Staging is where you put the props behind, and this is where a lot of the conspiracy theories behind Kubrick comes. So now what I've done is I'm going to stage it. Now the Man in Black is dead. Yeah, Floki behind him. But take a look at their table. That's only got 3 legs. Does that mean that it's not standing on stable ground? And I'm making some type of, I'm posing some commentary here on pop culture itself in the industry. Yeah, who knows, man? But staging and blocking are very different. Now, I will say that I will have to really bring up that he definitely does, after Spartacus, go to great lengths to consolidate and do things like you're saying, but also there's, I mean, Eyes Wide Shut is still the longest running production in film history. He has the largest number of
and
takes.
It was still under budget.
Okay.
It was under budget. All of his films were under budget because he was able to take away the excess and concentrate on what made it actually important. And as when we were far into it, we can talk about the number of takes,
which
the
are
number of
not
takes,
normal. They're not normal. Upon my research,
not
one
normal,
thing that disturbed me was this. It was this. Now, the number of takes, I'm not saying it, I'm just, to be clear.
I love it.
It disturbed me. Upon research, it disturbed me. Okay. I mean, 120 sometimes for a stairfall.
There's reasons for this.
Let me say. No, hold on. Let me take my piece. But I'm saying, I'm not making him into being a monster, but I'm saying his obsession. Here's the thing about Kubrick. He never made a film that didn't mean anything. Meaning he never made something that was just entertaining. There's always a deep meaning behind it within that ambiguity.
An exploration, yeah.
I mean, and the guy only had 13 feature films throughout his whole career. He dies in 99, about 6 after, I think, the screening.
Really less than that, because honestly,
it's about 12,
Killer's Kiss and Fear and Desire are
those are counted, though. Those are counted, technically.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I agree with you.
They should be. But The Killing is really his first movie. Yeah. They're like his first real feature, and I mean, The Killing is fucking amazing. If The Killing was the
let's face it, Spartacus is really his first film for most people to begin with. You know what I mean?
That's sad though, because also Paths of Glory is
I'm not saying they're not good. No, Paths of Glory is very good.
Though. Well, always strange the way that they just talk in the regular accents. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
But that was a practicality. That's the thing, the practicality.
He is the most unpragmatic pragmatist I've ever ran into, though. I mean, the amount of takes in which he demands.
All right, I'm going to explain
the way in which he turns. He had one last chance to go back to New York City, which he was raised in, and he chooses to turn London. Or was it Tokyo? Filming in Tokyo?
London.
Okay, in London, he chooses to put Tom Cruise on a treadmill and put
that's great.
there's a certain amount of insanity that comes. I mean, and you show me a genius that's not a
that line. The movie's a dream.
Just show me a genius that's not a little bit insane. Or an insane person that's not a little bit of a genius, and I'll give you a lot of money.
Whether or not there was this fear of flying and all that.
A pilot, and they always phrase it as that. Oh, a pilot with the fear of flying. I'm like, okay, probably after the fact.
A pilot's license.
Yeah, he had a pilot license, and he acquired this phobia after. That there's a lot of hyperbolic speech that goes.
That was his actual first thing, the flying pod,
which makes sense to me. I always wondered about like why all these no, but it does make sense as a director because it's all about perspective. About the first thing you do in a video game after you die is you fly over the map to go see what's not. Like you want perspective about what's happening. So it really makes a lot of sense to me that a lot of these people are pilots. The phobia of flying is natural because guess what? A lot of people fucking die flying. It isn't healthy or anything like that. But I don't like when people are like, oh, a pilot that had a fear of flying. It's like, no, okay, so he had a pilot license. He developed a phobia. I'm not saying
I think that it is what it is. All right, so I'm gonna address two things. The first thing is the takes. Okay, I'm gonna talk about the takes.
Way too many. I mean, he just takes it in so many awards. Nobody matches it.
You do have to remember that you're dealing with less technologically advanced equipment. And oftentimes, even if you look at older films, you see things like hairs and imperfections in either the lens or gets caught in the gate between the film and the lens. And that was a thing that drove him nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And so partially what was responsible for a lot of the overabundance of takes was a guy who was obviously obsessive compulsive, but because so much of the technology was unreliable, even then when you took the film, I mean, look, we're not talking about fucking HD where you can look at it, what your monitor is better than what it's going to be projected on. We're talking about you're looking at, there's no monitor. He's looking at something, he's trusting that that's what it is. right? And then when it's developed and processed, and he wanted to try to do the least amount of alterations if possible to capture what was actually happening. That's the first thing. That doesn't account for all of it. Secondarily, he did have the idea. Now, I guess the person who's most famous for doing the least amount of takes is Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood doesn't even do a walkthrough. He sometimes just has them do it. He doesn't even block.
Or
he
sometimes
says,
he just debates a chair.
Go from here. Yeah, sometimes he debates a chair.
Yeah, he's like, I'll just debate this chair. They're like, okay, Clint.
I think what he's trying to achieve is a perfection of the photograph through film. And when there's movement involved with so much, he had an obsession with moving the camera, and at the same time an obsession with controlling light and angle, which is basically a recipe for disaster, because once you start moving the camera, you're messing with all of that.
Yes.
So every time it moves even a fraction of an inch, he's changing how something should be.
Yeah.
If I was to actually, a lot of people compare Nolan to Kubrick.
Yeah.
But if there's one director working today who's actually most like Kubrick, it's Quentin Tarantino. Tarantino's framing takes two, and he also has a sense of freedom on the set, which most people would not. I think people think of Stanley Kubrick like he was on the set yelling at everybody, you have to do perfectly like this, do it like this. You just say, no, we got to do another take. Because he was scared that it wasn't going to come out right technically. He wanted the actor to do it so many times that it was natural.
Yeah.
Well, and he was obsessive compulsive. You can't deny if you do.
No, you can't, because the technical prowess is here. If you okay, yeah, but in Tarantino does the same thing, and he's,
which those guys are perfect. Look at Tarantino.
They're not perfect. My issue is, okay, the technical prowess. If we're gonna, give him all these, praises. Listen, if you don't got it after 20 shots, you don't got it. Okay, you don't have that. That's not a legit. No, here's the thing. The technical side he had, what he wanted was authenticity. And there's a double-edged sword.
Yes, you're correct.
And he wants authentic reaction. Now, that's why he might have called Shelley a cunt. That's why he had. That's why he had Tom and Nicole move in their. First off, Eyes Wide Shut. That's a real bedroom that's modeled after, and they moved in their real things. And he had individual therapy with each of them. Did his daughter go to Scientology? And might he have some issues with Tom because of that? And might there be some metaphor? I actually do buy into that one. Yeah, okay, I actually do buy into that one.
The conspiracy.
I will buy into that. No, I actually buy into that one. But here's the thing. Doesn't matter. All that aside, those are a unreasonable amount of takes for any actor or actress to take. The technical thing, then you would need to get the fuck out of the director's chair at that point if you can't get it down by that. Honestly, no, that's true. There's a certain limit.
I have to disagree.
You cannot praise him as the god of this technological filmmaking, and then say he needs 120.
That's how you get there.
Oh no! This is the last film. No.
That's how you get. And but let me say that
he's got a bunch of pratfalls that he needs 120 takes of. Are you serious?
The Shining thing is totally different, and I think that situation is not really, that is a stain on his legacy, and whether or not it's true of the things that took place on that set with both him and Jack Nicholson basically intimidating her constantly, if that was to get the role or whatever. I'm not so sure, because I've actually read where people said that's just not true at all. That was made up, that it's one incident that was caught on when his daughter made the short documentary about The Shining, where it's like, tell Shelley, this kind of thing. So I don't really get into that. I try to just stay what's on the screen. But if that is true, that's not right, and I agree with you there.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to demonize the guy.
The take thing,
that's a lot of takes. Those are a lot of takes.
I like it. I am fine with it. And let me tell you something. When I hear that you take 100 takes for someone to walk through a door, it makes me smile. Maybe I'm sadistic, but I understand having been a director. Maybe I still haven't directed in a while, but I understand the way you want something the way you want it. And the only thing I have to say is this. This is not a The Room situation where you
No.
have just an egomaniac. You have a man who literally was the greatest director. So if the greatest director needed 100 takes, maybe everyone else should be doing a few more takes.
Well, he got the best.
Justin?
That is the thing. It comes down to an artist.
Maybe that's what it takes.
No, well, it does, in his opinion. And it comes down to
because when I see, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So we talked about this before. It comes down to an artist basis. The only thing you want to be careful of is setting a precedent that is unhealthy. Tarantino has been accused of this as well, but I'm not about to retcon all this and demonize. No, it is all about if he gets the best work out of them. So if Tom Cruise might have been picked for multiple reasons, maybe a little bit of revenge for his daughter. Yeah, did he ruin his marriage? I don't know. Maybe it's pretty weird the things that Kubrick did, but at the same time, like he set that, like he did 2 weeks of that sailor scene that they cut 90 seconds of. But let's remember, we got the Spielberg cut, as well. So it was watered down, and he cut Tom from there, and he had marriage counseling, which I'm just gonna go ahead and say I've never been a director, but I have been a part of productions. That is not a part of the director's shop. And he wants authenticity. So if he can get the best performance out of you, and you are like, okay, so Joaquin Phoenix is going to be all about that, right? Joaquin Phoenix is going to be in it. Like, he's going to be all about that, but you don't want to set that precedent.
Yeah, imagine if he was in if Kubrick was, and Paul Thomas Anderson is another one.
Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, he'd be like, Daniel, you shot here. I'm shot here. And he'd go, I'm going to shoot you. He would let him shoot him. You know what I mean? Like, there's actors that are going to do that. Imagine if he was in Eyes Wide Shut.
Imagine if it had been Daniel Day-Lewis. But I don't know, because see what Kubrick was into, too, and when you see the people he chose as actors, is something that I like to talk a lot about when I'm talking with my man Heath Solo, which is body acting, emotion, and movement. And a lot of people take that for granted. And you wonder why a person like, say, a Brad Pitt, why is a Brad Pitt real? Why does he get, it's not just because he's good looking. Look at the way the guy moves his body.
Plenty of good looking people in Hollywood.
His freaking toes know that the camera is turned on. You know what I mean? Like, he has complete control over his body at all times. Matthew Modine in Full Metal Jacket. Why did he choose Matthew Modine? But he was perfect.
And I can't remember the name.
How about D'Onofrio?
There was a dropout too for Modine's for Joker, and there's a to close it off. There's this authenticity. I'm not going to demonize the guy by any means, but I'm going to say there are some questionable practices that's where the art, it's that double-edged sword. Because Tom Cruise, say what you want to say about him personally, the guy is dedicated to his art. So when I see conspiracy theories about and it's pretty enticing about how his daughter went to Scientology, and Tom Cruise.
I never even heard this. This is the things that I've never really paid
this is in my research. I've found this, so of course, Eyes Wide Shut. That's this Illuminati, our secret society, fire and blah blah blah. Ben Franklin's sex clubs and all that, back in Eyes Wide Shut. That's an overtly cryptic, occult saying. I walk around with Eyes Wide Shut, but for Tom Cruise to be a part of it, he makes sense for so many reasons. First off, he can play that character right. Second off, he's going to do what Kubrick wants him to do, which is really pretty much unaskable for anybody, because Tom Cruise is like, oh yeah, I'll be a fighter pilot. I guess I'll go with the Navy at 50 and become a fighter pilot. So he's going to do the work, but also there is that last scene where the daughter walks away, and the self-obsessed Nicole Kidman and him are just talking, and they walk away with two characters that are actually in part of the orgy, and they walk away with her in the toy store. It's the daughter is leaving, and there's all these meta messages with Kubrick's work, but again, staging, blocking, and all these things you can pick up after. And if you leave out actual context of the story, which has been overtly stated within dialogue, it's not as creepy. But with,
Well, that's.
I think it might be the perfect mix. I think that Kubrick saw Tom Cruise as the perfect actor in the perfect mark to be like, hey, guess what? Because his daughter really did abandon him. The same daughter you're talking about that did the documentary and stuff like that.
Vivian, right?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure. But I will say this too, as we were talking about the number of takes that that he would do. God, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. What were you talking about?
Well, I'm just
I was
saying
thinking
that
about something.
there is this very, I would say, almost malicious approach to its methodology.
Oh, I remembered it. Can I say it?
Go ahead.
Can I say it? Okay. I think that something to remember is that unlike a director like Hitchcock, who did tons of storyboards, and then sometimes it's rumored
He had
would
the
not
same
even
issues.
be on the set.
He had the same issues,
of
though,
the
to
film.
be clear, that Kubrick has.
But actually, he was entirely different, because what Hitchcock tried to do was to get what he called actors or cattle to do exactly what was in the storyboards. Yeah. That's not what Kubrick tried to do.
But he had the same issue with the harassment, like with the birds and all that.
But if he had somebody walk through a door 100 times, if you go back and you read some of these interviews, what you'll find out is it was originally the actor's idea to go through the door. So it was not the reason why a lot of times there were so many takes is because he allowed what he would record the practice takes and the blocking and how they were working it out. Then it would morph into what was perfection, and they might not even discover what they were actually going for until it was the 50th take. And the more experienced and self-assured and confident actors who are not intimidated by the process would realize that, while those who were not didn't even understand what was going on. And that was probably what the error in Kubrick as an on-set director was. And he's been compared sometimes to Lucas in this vein, which is somebody would say, what do you want me to do in the next take? And he would say, just fucking do it right. Yeah. That's what I want you to do. Yeah. Now, that's not direction. You know what I mean? How does an actor is dying at all times to have an 80-hour conversation about why their character is scratching their nuts or nose or something.
Which brings you to the next issue of why does he deny dailies? Why does he deny dailies then? Which are
because he's the director.
But that's the norm to give the dailies are for your the dailies are for your actors to be able to refine their process in their
that's not really. Dailies were originally around so the studio could make sure that their money was being spent.
Actors have access to dailies to refine their process as well. I think it comes down
to the director.
Listen, there's a lot of contradiction. Everything you said is true and everything I said is true, which makes him a walking
But you're right. The contradiction exists, and I think that it's also on a case-by-case basis.
It is.
And I think it's a film production is like creating a new company every time. Literally, I mean, you call it a company, but an office space even. Yeah. And maybe one of the reasons why you deny Tom Cruise, a notorious tinkerer and person who would get involved and call up the head of a studio and complain to people. That's why he plays the studio head in that movie, right? Because people used to make fun of him because even when he was freaking dancing around in his underwear, he didn't care. He'd go up to the person in charge and say, we should do it like this.
Yeah.
You know, he's Tom Cruise, dude. He'll jump. He's doing a movie in space. That's why you don't give Tom Cruise dailies. Would you give Tom Cruise dailies?
I probably would.
He would be telling you what to do immediately.
Listen,
he's more of a control.
He could probably abandon his daughter as he has in real life right in front of me. And I could realize the totality of that. And then he would ask me for dailies and maybe some candy.
This video is... You better watch Scientologists see this YouTube video, Justin.
Good. I'd be honored to be a part of it. Their bullshit. At least it's a rich bullshit. I like the equity there. I'd be like, oh yeah, you hate your daughter? Oh, that's cool. Here's your dailies. Here's whatever you want, Mr. Cruise. No, I get you. I think that what it comes down to is that Kubrick was a demanding perfectionist. What you talked about with the lighting is very true, and we talk about how they do story and how we end
that's
this
photography.
with the Clockwork Orange. You have this scene in which you have dominance being shown, and it's all through the shadows. So like the staging of that scene, you know, is so important. The pointing of the cane with the shadow as it gets bigger. I mean, the photographer in this guy stands out. This is the guy that says, I'm more than just an actor that wants to say I want to direct now. No, I'm a photographer that wants to say, you want to make moving picture shows? I'll show you how the fuck to do it. And he did it. Yeah. He said it ain't that hard, and we can make it better. And Kubrick did it. And I'm not going to victimize anybody, and we're not retconning it. We're not canceling anybody. I'm saying some of his practices are probably not something you want to set a precedent for, because those many takes, I don't give a shit who you are. That's too many. But it is what it is. And if the actor doesn't have an issue, if the actor doesn't have an issue, then it's not an issue.
Yeah, but that's art, you know. That's why
I'm with it, man. I'm with it. I'm with it. I'm just saying art. It's important to point out that there's flaws in his game, just like all of our games. But
you're talking about a different time, and also when you talk about his own influences, which like Max Ophuls, you know, Fritz Lang, and you're talking about Orson Welles, and a lot of other more obscure,
a lot of those Vienna influences too, and you can't trust those guys.
That's true. And I think that you're looking at silent film era. I mean, look, you're talking about a guy who really, so if you say Fear and Desire in 53 is his first, that's 1953, man. I mean, come on. How long had the motion picture even been around?
That's what I was saying. It's 51. It was through 53. Again, wasn't short on that. But at the same time, I'm with you, man. I said at the beginning that this is a time that people have to understand that the medium itself was to sell. And then it was actually before the leading man, which, yes, sorry, is very misogynistic, but it was the leading man, was a big thing. It was the auteur. It was the director. And now I think it's kind of, you know, what is old is new again. It's for better or worse. It's
always a cycle.
Yeah,
it's always a cycle.
Yeah, so no,
I mean, you're right. That's the way the studios became the studios from big directors.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? Like, and then
Name
it
me a
turns
screenwriter
itself and goes around.
Like,
and we'll see it now. Like all these Marvel, like I say, all these big Marvel, all these tent poles. Why do they exist? Because it's a business practice. Because now they make 5 movies a year instead of 15 or 20.
He raged against that machine.
Money. Yeah. So, but that's what are you going to do? People come up. It's so much cheaper now to make movies. It's really a pity that Kubrick died when he did. I mean, he lived a long life. But he died when he was 70 and 99. And I think if he had kept on living, he probably would have made one more film. I think 1 or 2 more films, maybe.
Well, he had not made a film in 10 years at that point. It's important to take note of, which is interesting.
Once the 60s were over, I mean, it goes 2001, 68, Clockwork Orange, 71, Barry Lyndon, 75, Shining, 80, Full Metal Jacket, 87, Eyes Wide Shut, 99.
Yeah, so over 10 years. You're
supposed to make other films in between.
And there's AI in there as well.
Yeah.
We all like that. Spielberg's like, fuck, this is what I'm stuck with. And it's important to take note.
Which I think would have been such a different. I mean, I love Steven Spielberg, but it's not. I mean, I don't think AI. It's a fun movie. It's kind of good, but that is not what Stanley Kubrick.
When have you ever said it's a Kubrick film? It's a fun movie.
It's not a Kubrick film. It's a Steven Spielberg jerking off and having fun. Movie,
it is. It's him. It's him. Yeah, taking care of things that
would have been a little bit different.
I think a lot different. But it is interesting. And in Kubrick, I think that Eyes Wide Shut was definitely a commentary on the elitist, the 1%. The people in power. I mean, like it's, you know, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Honestly, all conspiracy theories aside, and I think the only conspiracy theories to really if you look at the staging of Eyes Wide Shut, and this is for like a different, like an alt channel of mine, maybe. But it is interesting to look at Eyes Wide Shut again. I promised you I wasn't going to look at it because of things. I was like, it's kind of depressing. But I looked into it. Oh man, the staging of it. Some of the symbolisms. But I think
that's interesting that you see. I think that yes,
it's very clear about about power, right? I mean, that's not being hidden. by
I
any means.
do, but I think that really, to me, like I said, I'm not as far as the kind of the conspiracies or the things surrounding the film, especially with Eyes Wide Shut and Nicole Kidman and Tom blah 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 and all the fucking crazy sex shit at the end and the cult and all that, and the guy prostituting his daughter or something. Back over, like it's insane. To me, Eyes Wide Shut is a story of a marriage.
It is.
And all of that stuff is only a metaphor for the conspiracy that of love and the conspiracies that you invent in your mind when you are jealous,
Yeah.
when you are questioning. I mean, think about it. The entire film is just about she glances. She just simply looks at a guy and thinks about having sex with him. She never did it.
Well, yeah, he filmed 2 weeks of it, but
Right?
she is a dream sequence, and yeah, she is only.
No, but that's the dream.
No,
but that dream sequence is what he has. That's
Yeah.
Tom Cruise's dream sequence.
They're ambiguous. Yeah,
He has it.
and also,
Right? So I think that
the
it's
self-consumption.
his own creation. Yeah.
Also,
And
look at the
also-
artwork. Look at Nicole, where she's looking when they're kissing.
Desire.
She's looking in the
There's-
mirror at herself. That self-obsession, that beauty, that
Because you create it yourself. Because where does your love for another person come? You attribute it to them, but it comes from you.
your self-worth. It's yourself. It's a measure of your self-worth. Oh, trust me, I'm petty as hell.
That's what I take from Eyes
Oh,
Wide
I know,
Shut.
but and that's what you should. I think that is the basis and the foundation of that film. I think that he uses the medium of the occult because that could easily be done with a affair of any magnitude, right? But he steps it up in a very cinematic and thematic way, which is very pleasing. Yes, and it is all these things. I'm not saying, I mean, it doesn't have to mean more, but I'm saying there's obviously a knock. But like when people are like, oh, he doesn't name who, when he says, oh, if you knew who he was with you last night, meaning the people in power, you wouldn't be able to sleep so well. I'm like, so you want to name like the contemporary, like mayor of New York?
Well,
or
the
something?
mask.
Yeah, it's like,
it's them.
It's like
them,
there's
right?
some nonsense there too. I'm not buying in full. I'm just saying that some of the staging, I would just suggest that, especially Axel, you, and anybody watching, just take another look at With Eyes Wide Shut, and I find it to be very interesting, the staging of that film. There are some things there that shouldn't be there, some lattices that shouldn't be there. I'm not gonna get all Machiavelli on you, but it's interesting. So I can't make it. Yeah, it's interesting. It's fun. It's fun, but that's what makes it fun, right?
Yeah, and I do think that I know people complaining when it originally came out, and I saw it in the theater on the day it came out. I thought that the sets of New York that they did were magnificent. I thought that if they had actually shot it in Manhattan, it would not have been the same film, and actually it would have suffered from it. And I guarantee you that if he had actually got on a fucking plane and went and shot it in New York, when they got back, he would have edited it together and he would have then went and reshot it on a soundstage, because I think that dreamlike and the weird way that it was not even New York, it was like a European version of New York on purpose.
Yeah,
and I think that is an ode to not only the writer, but the music that he used. He was very influenced by classical music.
Yes.
Which is a great thing with 2001 too. The
reversing
great story
it as well, which is a cult, and is that he plays it on reverse.
So that's another thing about the classical music in 2001, that originally all the music that he used, he was just using it to kind of space out the editing, get the beats in the editing. And that comes to one of my probably the only famous Kubrick conspiracy theory that I'm actually into is the idea that Pink Floyd wrote part of Metal, and specifically Echoes was supposed to be in 2001. And I love that, because Echoes happens to be my favorite Pink Floyd song and one of my favorite songs of all time. And when you watch Echoes, when it goes ping and you start, it says Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite, and you watch, it works perfectly. It's not Wizard of Oz shit, which actually does kind of work well with Dark
Take enough
Side.
mushrooms and you'll be fine.
But this works way better.
Yeah.
that it is the sound, Echoes is the soundtrack to the end of 2001 and could be playing in the background of it. That's a fun conspiracy theory. But I think one thing that we hadn't mentioned was the increasing use of classical music throughout. And really, you look at 2001, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, even Full Metal Jacket, though it had some popular songs in it, and especially Eyes Wide Shut, that he was very inspired by music, by art, and by things outside of the realm of film. And one of the reasons why he was a fan of using books, or like in the case of 2001, actually working with Arthur C. Clarke at the Chelsea Hotel to write both the novel and the screenplay together. They were supposed to take dual credit, but it ended up not working out, not bitterly, but it did just
Not like Stephen King, who used to call in the middle of the night to wake up and put his car in The Shining to crash. And,
this is what I read this famous interview with Stephen King, and he said Stanley Kubrick was a weird dude. One time during the shooting of The Shining, he called me up in the middle of the night and he asked me, "Do you believe in God?"
Yeah, I used to do that all the time.
What's weird about that?
Well, he called him in the middle because he did it repetitively. Cool. Yeah, and then he found out what type of car he was driving, and that's the one that crashes. But no, Stanley Kubrick.
I think that's cool. I think that's a guy who's dedicated.
I think it's cool too. I also see the malicious part of it. I
love Stephen King, and I understand his problems with The Shining. But it doesn't mean that The Shining is not the greatest horror film ever made.
Well, let's say, can you really wake up Stephen King in the 70s or the 80s? Is there really a chance of that happening?
He was on cocaine.
Yeah, like when was he sleeping? You had to really.
That's a great point, Justin.
Yeah, come on, man. Like, what are the chances?
Exactly. Read on writing
fucking
and think
sleeping.
About that.
That's like 13% chance, like, of the whole year.
He was drunk. Yeah, he was drunk and stoned on coke.
You caught me the 1 hour a year I'm sleeping. Holy shit.
Yeah, that's what I didn't think about that too. I'm like, Stephen King, you really think that's weird? You're fucking Stephen King. You wrote a book where at the end of it, a bunch of kids have an orgy, and it's called It, and now it's a major motion picture, and everyone forgets how the book ends. But anyway, it's
weird that he's just sleeping. It's like, okay, so you're sleeping in the 80s. That's true. Questionable. But yeah, he is well known for. I think it's important
to remember that though Kubrick has become a director that so many directors look upon, when you look into Kubrick's own inspirations, you find people mention probably three names: Fritz Lang, Max Ophüls, and Orson Welles, I should say. But really,
not even Orson,
came
really
from novels. He would a voracious reader. He would read paintings. Yeah, he'd read 5 books a day or something like that. Like,
he's a modernist.
And the reason why he wanted to work with books was because there is a quote where he says, I like to take books that I didn't think were perfect and try to make them better in the film. Yeah. But I think it's really because he just had this classical aesthetic, and he had a devotion towards novels and towards writers. And he was just not into, he was into his brand of filmmaking. He was not into the Hollywood system, the French, the Russian, whatever. He was just not a joiner. He was an individual amongst all else. And that's the answer to why he would always use books. And when you look at his overall, right, they're all books.
Yeah.
Full Metal Jacket, Eyes Wide Shut, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon.
Even Dr. Strangelove was a comic that was adapted that the Pentagon got. Red Scare. There's nothing to be, and I've said this before. Adaptation is, there's a whole fucking movie on it, and it's something that we look into a lot on this channel. You talk about a lot, and about it's not better, it's not easier, it's not harder, it's different. It's like stage acting, film acting. Yeah.
And we've always talked about it with Game of Thrones.
Fire. Yeah, it's so ridiculous.
And I've said
the way in which people dismiss medium sickens me. Because it's so ignorant.
You gotta take it is very, and you know what? But what it is, it's sad because it doesn't allow them to enjoy something for what it is. And I've always said I'm both lucky and cursed. my two favorite books from the same guy, Arthur C. Clarke, because he's my favorite novelist, 2001 and Childhood's End. 2001 is the greatest science fiction film ever made, and Childhood's End was the shittiest miniseries that the Sci-Fi Network ever made. And I don't care. Fuck it. It doesn't change the story. But that's why I guess I always had kind of like, it was hard for me to, when people say, even today, comic books, oh, they didn't do this like that. You have to take something for what it was. And I don't think that, for instance, Lolita, you know, when you think of Kubrick's film and you think of Nabokov's novel, I don't think there's a lot of people. They're two different things. You know what I'm saying?
Not a lot of people are familiar with the novel to begin with, and
Do they not? When I was in high school, that was like mandatory reading. We all read Lolita.
You didn't read Lolita? No, absolutely. They corrected that.
I went to a Catholic high school.
Oh, that's why. Yeah, no, you thought that would be more, you know, you thought that'd be more virtuous, didn't you? Yeah, no.
That's why you're right.
Fucked up. Yeah. And aren't you mostly Jewish? Yeah. So yeah. There's so many contradictions there. Anyways.
Well, that's another thing though, which we should get into, which before we end, which is say why I always love Kubrick too, is because
he was Jewish, but he didn't identify necessarily.
No, not. I mean, first of all, I think that the lack of a consternation over religion or ethics, quote unquote,
odd for this time. Very odd for this time.
Which is very odd. Which is what always attracted me to him. Which is that he didn't. You know, look, I love Martin Scorsese, and I think that he has examined his own Catholicism and wanted to be a priest so many times, and it's interesting. But
fellas from my neighborhood. It's about the fellas from my neighborhood. Every film,
another one too. But even at an early age, I would just felt that so much of American film, novels, everything is so Judeo-Christian.
Yeah.
It's so overly, again and again, examining the stories and the implications and the morals and sexuality. It's incredibly boring to me. And I mean, I shouldn't say that I loved Lost, and Lost examined that, but it had the Eastern spin, which I think made it interesting. But that's what I love about even like Lolita. You're an hour into that movie, and then you're like, you say this guy's a pedophile. Like, what the fuck is this movie? You know what I'm saying? Like, but you're watching the film, and it keeps on going. And I'm not gonna say we don't have to get into that conversation, but even in Full Metal Jacket, War, right, which was shown to me when I was in high school by my AP, Mr. Powers, the greatest history professor ever lived. You know, look at The Shining, the way it deals with things. Barry Lyndon, the way he almost got killed by the IRA because of it.
Yeah.
The way Clockwork Orange deals with sexuality, ultraviolence. He just put an honest lens, and it didn't surprise me early in my obsession of Kubrick to find out that he started going from photography to documentary. Because like you said, that authenticity, he doesn't get trapped in a lot of the boring, repetitive cycles that a lot of American films, with their obsessions of violence and sex and their guilt and these Judeo-Christian ideas, which are just so played out, you know, like it's enough already. And that's why I think Kubrick is so freeing, because what he examines is the human condition at its base. And there is something to be said for the lack of diversity in his work. But I think that has more to do with the fact that he was just ingrained in the kind of white European world, and that's who he was. And then
he moved to London and filmed everything in New York and London, and tell me how much diversity is there.
There's a lot now, but there's not a lot.
You don't have the demographic for a lot of diverse extras.
I think at that time you're right. You may be right. I'm not so sure about.
It's not accessible.
I couldn't be an expert on it.
Well, there's just there's a high amount of Caucasians in London. So,
a lot of Caucasoids.
Yeah.
But basically what I'm saying is that is something, we hadn't mentioned it yet, and that is something that you can see, but there's absolutely
he
no
took
evidence.
Pictures when he was a photographer at the Gentlemen's Club, not of just the ladies, but of the gentlemen viewing. This voyeuristic approach in which you speak of the human condition. So
I just think the guy was who he was, and I think that there's
he knew people who are who they are, and accepted it and wanted to document it for better or worse.
There's a larger conversation there to be had, and maybe that's something that after this conversation I'd be interested in doing some reading and educating myself about it.
Oh no, but you just sold me out of it.
The lack of holding on to a religion, or even in a sense an ethnicity or culture, though he was in many ways American. No, A Clockwork Orange, it doesn't take place in America. Nor does Barry Lyndon, nor does Full Metal Jacket, nor does Paths of Glory or Spartacus, or portions of Lolita.
Yeah, but they're all saying something about America.
Yeah, I think they are, and I think that he was in a way a commentator.
MICKEYMOUSC. Ho ho! Oh, did you go kill people in Vietnam? Ho ho!
Yeah. Oh man, Full Metal Jacket is
the dialogue is like the best for me.
Yeah, it's great. Full Metal Jacket is amazing.
I don't know how authentic it is, but like the discourse between like Joker and people over there once he gets over there,
it's pretty. I mean, it comes from the things they carry.
Yeah, like it's obscene. I was like, I watched it recently again. I was like, oh my god! And I commented. I think it was Roger or Gene Lyons from Shadow TV put that out. I said, dude, I don't usually say this, but the dialogue in that film is sick. Like the way in which they speak. Like, I don't know if it's authentic because I'm not from that era and I wasn't in Vietnam, but it's like
it's pretty authentic.
Yeah, it just seems like it's like that weird, goofy, authentic. Like, it just seems it's so weird it has to be real, right?
And people faced with such horror that they have no recourse but to joke and laugh to try, laugh to keep from crying.
Here, Pilgrim. Yeah, it's perfect, man.
Even the structure of it, the break showing how the military breaks you down to build you up, and just Joker's struggle with it. I mean,
he's in a feminine situation. He becomes feminine. Or he is demasculated and then emasculated, whatever the proper verb is. You get it. I'll cut it. But no, yeah, it's an interesting. I think that Full Metal Jacket, if I had to be honest about what I really like about Kubrick, that would be it. That'd be it. I think 2001, the technical side of it really pulls me in. And I like it. I love it, obviously. But Full Metal Jacket is something that, like, if me and you want to go watch a movie right now, like, that's the one I pick. I'm sorry. Like, that's
really?
Man. It's just the one I pick. It's the one I grew. But also, my older brother, showed it to me. So there's all those things that line into that, right? I
think my favorite two Kubrick films will probably be. I mean, I've seen them all so many fucking times. Probably 2001 and The Killing. I love The Killing, and The Killing is so early. Oh, it's fantastic, man! The Rashomon style. Telling of a horse race ripoff. They robbed the racetrack. Sterling Hayden. I mean, it's amazing. Even Killer's Kiss has actually been copied many times. Surprisingly, a lot of people don't talk about Killer's Kiss, but the famous running through the mannequins at the end, and that had some. I can see why. Fear and Desire, he kind of were the mannequins Killer's Kiss or Fear and Desire? I think it was Killer's Kiss. Those two films are closely linked, but he kind of said he didn't like Fear and Desire anymore. And one more thing I respect about Stanley Kubrick is burning the negatives and not giving like alternate takes, because in the past week I've heard that they're giving us new versions of Rocky IV and Batman Forever? Why?
Why not? Hey,
the movie that came out is the movie that came out. Leave it alone.
Well, yeah, but Schumacher's dead now, so
Yeah, you gotta get some Warner Brothers. The HBO needs something on HBO Max.
Give me a penny for my
That's
thoughts.
the only reason they're doing the Snyder cut.
Penny for my thoughts. Oh no, wait a minute. Give me $1. Everything's worth more once you're gone. Yeah, that type of deal. Yeah, it's worth more once you're dead, man. Ask anybody.
All right, well,
it is what it is. No, I love it. I love it. I think that Kubrick, there's a reason why he is spewed from every person's mouth of worth these days. And
go watch the Stanley Kubrick movie, people.
Yeah, go check it out. I'm a Full Metal Jacket man myself. Oh, but no, Axel, tell everybody where they can find you at.
Well, let me first say that this was incredibly enjoyable. And if my wife and child weren't about to bust through the seams and make all the noise that they possibly could, I would continue talking to you all day, Justin. You can find me at dvrpodcast.com. We're continuing on with our coverage of Mindhunter. I'm going to have on some people. We're talking about our brackets that we're doing on Facebook, our Daily DVR Hall of Fame TV brackets. I just had some cats from Play Like a Jet, a great New York Jets podcast on. That was a lot of fun. So I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, slowing down a little bit. You're picking up with the corona. I got to slow down because I got a kid, and it's a little hard to run around with the kid and then do all the podcasting. But this has been a great time to just sit down. Go watch Kubrick, and I'll tell you this, people. Something I learned actually from Scorsese when I was watching this old documentary or this interview with him.
About the fellas from his neighborhood?
Yeah. The Swells from the Neighborhood. Watch the Kubrick movie with the sound turned off. If you want to really see what Justin is talking about, the mise-en-scene, the set design, the production design, why certain angles, camera movement. Nothing pisses me off more when people don't complete pans or they don't complete zooms or they don't complete any movement with the camera has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I just throw in one of my favorite shots of all time from Kubrick is in A Clockwork Orange when what's his name, Alex, is they have broken into that old kind of theater or whatever.
Yeah,
and he's on this like he's up in like a balcony, and then he just for no reason like the camera just zooms into him.
Yeah,
it's so artificial, which is something that Kubrick tried not to do. Like you're saying, give the audience know what technically is happening.
Yeah.
That I thought it's just so striking. So that's just something to look for. But I don't know. I could talk all day.
No,
thank you, Justin.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you. I asked you on for this one for a reason. A lot of people, when I asked to come on, they said Kubrick, and I said no. Because no, yeah, I wanted somebody that was of that generation. You're not old, but you're slightly older than I am.
I'm an old fogey,
but you are more of that generation than I was. To be fair, you know what I mean.
I was born in 1974, so I was born a year before Barry Lyndon. Though I didn't see it. Actually, the only thing I saw in the theater, I saw Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut. I've seen 2001 in the theater a couple of times, and I've seen all of his films except for, except for Killer's Kiss and Fear and Desire on film. So I've seen Killing, Paths of Glory, Sparta. I've seen them all on film, which I was lucky.
Ideally, I would have had somebody born in 1958 or 1960 to have on, but I don't have any of those. So you're the next. No,
I don't know any real old fogies.
Yeah, I don't want them. They're all, how's this Michael work? But it is true with the zoom. We had Denny Villeneuve was the focus last week, and he's all about no focus. Like he shoved the camera up in Pacino's face, to get it. And it's just so interesting to see because, it is kind of like, just like Denny Villeneuve in Arrival from last week's episode. If you guys remember, I talked about how he puts exposition over a montage. And that's usually a great sign of bad writing. It's like, oh shit, now they're just explaining stuff. And this is what happens when Luis did this and blah, blah, blah. But this is the same thing when we're talking about Kubrick of him using the zoom, which is kind of like, even at this time, like taboo. Like, oh, you don't do that. You know what
something you'd see in a musical.
Yeah, but no, he does it, and he does it in a way that's like, Ads.
We even get a chance to talk about everything's catty corner. If you look, I mean, this
We'll
is
do
how I
another
learn
one.
when you're
Yeah, we'll
shooting.
do
Yeah,
another
you
one.
never shoot straight on, and if you shoot straight on, you center the hell out of it.
Yeah,
Everything's to
all of you
extremes.
web camera and your keyboard warriors out there, I really, really encourage you to go take a camera out in the real world and try to shoot a story. Tell me a story about a guy that wants something, or a gal, we're not misogynistic here, that wants something, he needs something, or she needs something, what's in their way, and how do they get it? Might be a ball on the other side of that fence that they hit over, and they need it. What's stopping them? The fence. Tell me that story.
That's a good exercise.
And shoot it. Yeah, shoot it. And tell me how easy that is. And then you'll appreciate people like Kubrick. Yeah. So, no, this is Justin Thomas from Top Shelf Fandom. This is Storyteller Series, Episode 6. W. Axel Foley from Daily DVR. Yeah, baby. And we will see you soon.